Good evening. Good to see everybody. We're in Hebrews chapter 11. We would be further than we are, but there was an intervention of a storm, and we stopped last week. But so I'm going to go back and reread beginning at verse 1 just to set the stage. I won't make any real comments in the early part. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it he, being dead, still speaks. By faith Enoch was taken away, so that he did not see death, and was not found, because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony, that he pleased God. But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. By faith Noah, being divinely warned of things not seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became the heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. By faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. By faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. These all died in faith, and I would add, just like they lived. In what sense did they die in faith? They still hadn't received the promise. It wasn't theirs yet. They died believing they would receive it. That's faith. That's a trust in God. It's a trust we need to have as well. Now, notice afar is a long way. We're assured of them, that is, persuaded that they would receive what they taught. They embraced them, and that is, that literally they greeted them. That's interesting, isn't it? They greeted the promises of God. They were excited about it, and like greeting some special person in your home. They lived as strangers. The word there is xenos. You've heard of xenophobia? Here's your word right here. Strangers, foreigners from a different land, and pilgrims on the earth. And a pilgrim in Latin was one who crosses a field. It's not his own field. He's just walking across the field, and it doesn't belong to him. And that's exactly how they lived. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they call to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. All right, the word desire is probably the key word there, and it means to reach, to stretch out. And I now, at the age that I am, and in the last recent years, if I were to hold one of these sweet baby boys over here, they almost invariably will reach out. They're trying to get my glasses, almost without fail. They're reaching out, and I have to hold them out like this, or they're going to get them. That's just the way that works. That's the imagery here that we need to see for ourselves. that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were reaching out for what? A better country, a better place. They could have gone back home if they'd have been seeking that opportunity, but they weren't. They thought of something better. They were looking forward to something different, and thus they reached out. And that's the image that is used by the writer, and it helps, at least helps me, to get a better grasp on what's going on. So verse 17, by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he had received the promises, offered up his only begotten son. The word offered there, it describes an already completed act. You can hear it in the English. I mean, it doesn't take a Greek knowledge to know that. He offered him. You say, well, he didn't offer him. Well, yeah, but I've never done anything difficult that I didn't have to basically do it in my mind first. And I think that's what went on here. He had to reason this out. Why? Well, listen. Of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called. This is the son of promise. There's not another one. No other son of Abraham's will fill this role. Isaac is the one God said his seed would come from. That's not going to change. So he had to think, well, okay, so if I offer him, what's going to happen? How's that going to transpire? He's still going to be the one through whom my lineage comes, through whom I get all these children and great-grandchildren and great-great, and on down, all the way down the line. Here comes the answer. Concluding that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. It's interesting. The word there is parabole, and you all know that word, parable. Received him in a parable. And remember, sometimes when we were younger, we'd say a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. Well, there's a bit of that here, because there is a son in heaven that is of the descendants of Abraham who will die, and he will be raised from the dead. But there's also another sense, and that is that because Abraham in his mind had already done this act, as is written here, that when God stayed his hand, that effectively he got him back raised from the dead. Because in his mind he's already dead. And so effectively he gets him back. So the word parable, I think, probably plays both ways. Now, that's my view of it. You may not like that, but you think about it yourself and see what you come up with. That's my thinking on those verses. By the way, I'm giving you all the references back to Genesis. They're all in the notes. I'm not going back there to read them, not because I'm afraid to, but because if I do, then next week I'm going to sit back and watch Drew try to finish this book in 2 weeks. And I'm trying not to do that to him. All right, so verse 20. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. Now, wait a minute. By faith? Well, when he blessed them, did they have what he said they would have? No, they didn't have it. So when he blessed them in faith, believing they would have it, but not knowing it, except he trusted in God. Go ahead. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning on the top of his staff. Now that's kind of the more interesting one. Joseph's firstborn was Manasseh. His secondborn was Ephraim. Ordinarily, you'd have given the greater blessing to the firstborn. That'd be Manasseh. But Isaac, excuse me, it's not right, Isaac. Jacob. I'll get the right character in here in just a second. Okay, so Jacob, by faith, put the secondborn ahead of the firstborn. Read the history of Israel, go through the books of Joshua and Judges, and notice that, even in Numbers, notice the numbering of the people. Which one of these tribes was bigger? Ephraim. Which one plays a greater role later in the life of Christ? Well, it's going to be Ephraim. Still going to play that way. He's not from that tribe, but they play a big role. And so, by faith, he looked down the road, and that's what he saw. Even though he wasn't there yet, he trusts God. He believes it. Then, by faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. If Joseph was 30 years old, and he was when he became governor in the land of Egypt, and he died at 110, that's 80 years. Take 80 years off of 430, and what do you get? 350 years. So Joseph, 350 years before it happened, said, don't bury me here. When you leave here, take my bones. That's faith. You're looking 350 years down the road. That is tremendous faith that we're talking about. Joseph exhibited that. Verse 23, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. Okay, this verse, when I was younger, I think I always looked at it wrong. This is not Moses' faith. Moses didn't hide himself. He was only hidden until he was 3 months old. He didn't do that. Who had the faith? Mom and Dad. That's who had the faith. They hid him, even though they knew that Pharaoh said, you got to throw all the boy babies into the river, to kill them. Don't you find it kind of, just as a sidelight, a little bit interesting that when the 3 months were up that they threw Moses in the river? They just used an ark to do it, I find that, they kind of sort of kept the law. They put him in the water, right? But God saved him. How did he do it? Did it by Pharaoh's daughter. Really is how he achieved it. Then, by faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Okay, what did he do? Well, he went out, visited with the his Hebrew brethren. He did not like the way that the Egyptians were treating them, and he chose to align himself with the Hebrews and suffer rather than enjoying what he could have enjoyed in Egypt. And there are a number of historians that lean toward the idea that he would have been, Moses would have been the next Pharaoh. He is the son of Pharaoh's daughter. There's apparently no male heir other than this one who is available. And if so, then he gave up being the most powerful ruler on the face of the earth so that he could go suffer with God's people. That is remarkable in its faith. He went with them rather than to watch them suffer without joining them. So then, by the way, the reproach of Christ, the word reproach there is disgrace, shame of Christ, and how it's talking about the same type of shame he bore is the idea that we're looking at there. By faith, verse 27, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Okay, now somebody said, wait a minute. The first time he left, he feared the king. Did he fear him the second time? And the answer to that is no. He did not fear him the second time. And that I think this has reference to the second departure, not the first. Because the first time he left, afraid that the king would have him killed because he'd killed the Egyptian taskmaster that was involved in that situation. The second time, though, he did not fear the king. And you can see that. Moses goes in before him. You'd have to have a lot of courage to talk to the most powerful man on the face of the earth and tell him the things that Moses did. Start with the very first one. God says, let my people go. How popular do you think that's going to be? With Pharaoh, I don't think very popular at all. So Now, then by faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. Really, all the Israelites who kept that first Passover did so by faith. They trusted God that if they had the blood on the lintels and doorposts of their houses, that the firstborn in their houses would not die. Did God honor that faith? He did. He rewarded them. They diligently sought Him, and He rewarded them. I propose to you that it's very important to realize that in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, the Apostle Paul says, even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. We, because of our sins, are destined for eternal death. But if we have the blood of Jesus on, as it were, the doorposts of our heart, then death will pass over us. And we have to have faith to believe that. So it goes right along with what we're reading here. Verse 29, by faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians, attempting to do so, were drowned. Now, someone says, well, what do you mean by faith? Well, I'll tell you what. If you can imagine the Red Sea standing up in a heap, two walls on either side, and you're walking down between there, do you not think it takes faith to believe that water ain't going to come back down? It would for me. You know, I can just about imagine. In fact, I have a vivid memory of when we lived in Mobile. Teresa's probably got a frighteningly vivid memory of the same event. We had taken both our children. Tabitha was very small. Teresa, really not a big fan of swimming in deep water at all. And deep is anything above her head, okay? That's deep to her. I swim deep water. She doesn't do that. But we're out there, and Allen, which was a hurricane, was going toward Texas. And see, the Gulf is like a big bathtub. If there's a storm out there, the whole Gulf's doing this thing, So here we are, and I had them out on a raft. I was letting Tabitha experience it. Of course, Nathan's a fish. It didn't matter, with him. He's going to escape somehow. And I would pull them out to where I was up to about here. That means Teresa's, it's getting to be deep water for her. And I look back, because what I was going to do is we're going to all ride this raft into the shore. And I looked back, and the water was twice as tall as me. And I thought, uh-oh, we got a problem. And we did. I had to pull Tabitha first and then Teresa onto the raft. My fish, I didn't worry about. He escaped. I didn't worry about him. But I think it would take a lot of faith to walk between those walls of water, to trust they're going to stay up the whole time you walk across that sea, it's going to stay up. That's faith, and that's what the writer says here. Verse 30, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. Now, that's the only way that could be. No other city in the history of the world has been defeated by marching around it 13 times and shouting and blowing trumpet. No other city's ever fallen that way. It took faith to believe that would even work. They did what God said, and it worked. The city fell down. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. And if you read that story, if you go back to the book of Joshua and read it, she had come to believe in God. And because she believed in God, she turned to those fellows and she said, listen, I want you to spare me. I want my family to be saved. And they made a covenant with each other, and she was saved because of it. And guess what? She ends up in the lineage of Jesus Christ. She is one of 5 women specifically that show up in the lineage, and it's interesting how many of them are not Jewish. She being one, not Jewish, but she'd taken up God and thereby became, in a sense, the word a proselyte, of the Jewish religion. So Verse 32, and what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in the battle, turned to flight the armies of aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. Now, what did he just end up saying? Well, he just ended up saying, look, we're going to talk about faith. There's so many more I can talk about that we haven't got time. That's basically what he says. Now, what I did, watch your slide that starts with 1132. So now he begins to list, and what I've done here is listed every one of these characters and told you a reference, or given us a reference to them. So Barak conquered the Canaanites in Judges 4. Gideon defeated the Midianites, Judges 7. Jephthah subdued the Ammonites, Judges 11. Samson slew the Philistines, Judges 13 through 16. David trusted God to keep him safe from Saul, and he did not harm God's anointed. You think about the faith it took. Twice, David could have killed Saul. He had the advantage on him. Saul went into a cave to relieve himself, and David was right there, close enough that he could cut the tail off his robe. But he didn't kill him. Did that take faith? I think it did, because Saul was trying to kill him. He was pursuing him all over. It happened another time too, twice. The second time, David went right down in the middle of the camp, and God caused everybody to stay asleep. And David took his spear and the water jug that belonged to the king, and then he kind of chastised Abner. Said, Abner, who's watching out for the king? Which David would have been a better one to watch for him, but okay, that's not the way it is. Took a lot of faith to do that. Samuel served God faithfully, anointing 2 kings. Various prophets like Elijah and Jeremiah served though threatened and abused. Samuel and David wrought righteousness by public administration of divine justice. Canaan was received because of faith. Lions' mouths were shut for Daniel, and fire's violence quenched for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Elijah and Elisha and Jeremiah all escaped the sword. Gideon was made strong, became valiant, and put armies of enemies to flight. The widow of Zarephath and the Shunammite woman received their dead raised. Many refused to deny God, looking forward to heaven. Samson was mocked. They mocked him, guess when? Right before he brought the house down. That's when they mocked him. While Jeremiah endured beatings, bonds, and imprisonment. Other prophets were stoned, sawn in two, tempted, and slain by the sword. They wandered in poverty, destitute, and afflicted, and tormented. Their lives set them above those around them, just like it had Noah. Bang. Could we talk more about that? Yeah, I mean, I could preach a whole series of sermons on that. There are too many good people of faith there. But the goal here is to show something very special. You remember when he started the chapter, he talked about the elders who received a good report by faith. And remember I said, in this case, the elders are the fathers of the Jewish nation. Now we got a list of those elders. He started with a much more specific list, talking about what they did. And finally, he gets to a point where he says, I just can't name them anymore. Just let me go bang, 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 bang. There they are, all laid out before you. Now, all of them acted in faith. He's demonstrated that for us very clearly. But guess what? They died the same way they lived, in faith. Listen to the last two verses. And all these, having obtained a good testimony. Maybe we ought to underline that in our minds. God thought a lot of them. They had a good testimony, but what? Good testimony through faith did not receive the promise. God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. What is the promise? Forgiveness of sins. None of them had their sins forgiven until Jesus died on the cross. That is the underlying point of the entire Old Testament. And I was like everybody else. I was brought up, the easiest way to explain it is their sins were rolled forward. No, I don't think that's a good explanation of it. They offered sacrifices, and their sins were taken off of their account, and they were put on Jesus Christ's account. That's what really happened. It's like, you taking up the bills for somebody else. Whoever that might be. It's a lot like that. They're not, as far as the individual's concerned, they don't owe anything anymore. You took the bills. But until you pay the bill, somebody still owes for it. And that's the point. They could not go to heaven until Jesus came. So, Sue is going to shoot me for even going down this road, but I'm going to go down it anyway. So, think about it. Think about it. Where would the righteous dead have gone before Christ died? They had to go to the Hadean realm. They could not go to heaven because there was no means, no provision to get rid of sin. And so sins were still on the account, and they had to be paid for before they could go. Thus, you have Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. One of these days, if I get really gutsy, I'm going to tell you all about where the righteous dead are, as I understand it. But for today, I've given you this little bitty hint, and you can play with that. I've had to study this a long, long time to come to where I am. Okay, so we get better than they got because Jesus has died. And so, what is he really saying? I think the author is really saying, at least you all ought to be as faithful as they were. You got better than they did. You ought to be as faithful as they are. It troubles me a little bit how much we go by this mindset. What's the least I can do is still get to heaven? That's the wrong attitude. Do you see that attitude in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? I don't. Because their approach to it was, well, King, our God can deliver us, but if not, if there's some moral reason that he cannot deliver us, we're not going to bow down to your God anyway. Whoo-wee. That's potent. And does it challenge it? Well, it ought to, because those guys didn't have the promise of forgiveness of sins without the death of Christ. We've got the death of Christ. We've got the promise of the forgiveness of sins. It ought to stand out in our minds, what we have, and it ought to drive us to do better. We do the same thing with, people say, do Christians have to tithe? The answer is no. Should we do more than a tithe? Absolutely. Absolutely. Why? Because we got better than they had. You go all the way back to Abraham. He gave 10%. And he wasn't under the law of Moses. He wasn't required by any law we know about to give 10%, but he did anyway. But guess what? He died without having received forgiveness of sins. I didn't say it wasn't in his future, but he didn't have it yet. It's still on Jesus' account. Just keep remembering that. So, why give more than 10%? I'll tell you why I do. Because I got better than they did. By a long sight. All right. Chapter 12. Fun chapter, I think. 11's great. I love chapter 11. The problem with 11 is it makes me want to just stop and talk about every one of them. That's my problem. So I've blasted through a little bit there. Verse 1. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Okay, he literally picks up this idea of a competitor in the Olympic Games. And if you think about any Olympic Games, you imagine now the track and field events are run usually in the stadium. The exception would be the marathon, which concludes in the stadium. But all the rest of the track and field events are all run in the stadium. So now think about that stadium, which usually swoops up like this, and what is it like? It's like a cloud. Now, in this cloud of witnesses that he's just listed, I want you to think about something. When I get tempted to quit because I don't fully understand God's promise, I look up in the stands and I see Noah. You think he did? No, I don't think he did. When I think, boy, life's rough, people are mistreating me, I look up in the stands and I see Abel. He died for it. You see the point? You go down the list and just think about all those different characters, and what they did. When the going gets tough, a guy like Daniel knows the law's been passed. He knows the lion's den is ahead. What does he do? Goes right back to his room, prays just like he always did. Wow. Does that make me go on? Well, it ought to. Cloud of witnesses. Lay aside every weight. I might not have known too much about this. I didn't run track and field. But when I was in Henderson, Tennessee, one morning I came in and somebody had taken the weights that a runner uses and had thrown it through the window of the church building. Why? I don't know. For a long time I kept it. But eventually Teresa gets tired of me keeping everything. So it's long since gone. I don't know where it is. But what do they do with those? Well, in Mobile, we lived right close to the track where the state champion, highest level high school was. And I watched, they're always state champs in track, and I watched them run. And they would practice with weights on their ankles. So that, at least the theory was, when you got in the race for real, you took the weights off and you felt like you were running like the wind. Just flying down through there. So he said, take all the weight off. Now notice the weight he's talking about is not the sin. What kind of weight can weigh you down? Well, think about all the concerns of the world that we can allow to interfere with our obedience. That's weight. All right. Then the sin that so easily besets us. And I always like to, I think about that. I think about, I don't know, maybe some of you are not old enough, some are. I think about Carl Lewis, one of the fastest men in the world, maybe the fastest in his era. Usain Bolt, I guess, would be the modern day equivalent, roughly, to Carl. But Carl Lewis, I imagine him coming out to run the 100-meter dash in a maxi skirt that's really tight. Steve going down, trying to get set up. They say, go get in your position, and he's going like this. He can't even get down on the, on the place where his feet belong. He can't do that. And they fire the gun off, and he tries to take off, and the first big stride he takes, swoom, right down on his face. Sin is like trying to run a sprint in a maxi skirt. It'll trip you every time. Take it off. Get rid of it. That's what he says. And then he says, let us run with endurance. And the word endurance there is hupomeno. Doesn't matter that you remember that word, but hupa means under, and minnow is weight. Have you ever watched the weightlifters in the Olympic competition? You know how they pick up that weight and then they go, oh, and you just sit there and they're just shaking like crazy until they hear a horn or something, and then they just drop that thing. So think about them when the weight is above their head. They're hupomeno. They're remaining under the weight. Life can be a weight. It can be difficult to continue with. It can challenge your faith. But he says, watch those old men of faith, those great Hebrew fathers, and don't get out from under the weight that's in your life. Pretty good illustration. Drives me forward. Then he goes on, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured, same word. Endurance in verse 1, endured verse 2, same word. Endured the cross. He stayed under the weight. Aren't you glad he did? We sing a song, he could have called 10,000 angels. By the way, you got to do, with poetry, you got to do some things that are either exaggerated or understated. This is understated. He said he could have called 12 legions of angels. A legion was 6,000 men. The last time I looked, 6 times 12 is 72. He could have called, it'd be hard to sing that. He could have called 32,000 angels. See, it just doesn't fit. But you get the point. He stayed on the cross. He stayed under the weight. And if he can do it, the point is we ought to do it. That's his point. That's what he's saying. Look to him. He's the example. He's the one that we ought to think about and rely upon because, and keep thinking about, despising the shame. How interesting. A few years ago, the teenagers would have said it, they would have said he dissed the shame. He disesteemed is literally translated. Disesteemed the shame. He didn't like the shame of the cross. He didn't go to the cross looking forward to the shame. No. He looked beyond the shame. And isn't that what he goes on to say? Despising the shame is set down at the right hand of God. Well, he said it before. Who for the joy that was set before him. He looked beyond the shame to the happiness. You've seen people come up out of the waters of baptism with a beaming face because, man, that's all gone. It's past. Jesus stayed on the cross, not liking the shame, but loving the idea of your radiant face when you came out of the water. That's what the writer says, it seems to me, in verse 2. And where is he now? Well, he's done his job, so he sat down. Sat down on the right hand of the throne of God. That's the place of power. Peter, refers to that, doesn't he? In Acts chapter 2, when he says, God hath made that same Jesus whom you have crucified, both Lord and Christ. He's on the throne right now, Peter says. All right, verse 3. For consider him who endured, guess what? Same word. He's still using it. Endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. I want you to think about that. What would it be like to be hanging on the cross, knowing you could come down, knowing you got the power to do that, and the very people you came to save are down there saying, what's wrong with you? You saved other people. Why don't you just come on down from there? That's the way it was. But he stayed up there. He stayed under it. Again, same word being used over and over again here in that. And so it's a hostility again from the very people he came to save. And we should remember that so that, watch, so we don't do two things. What two things? Number one, lest you become weary. And the easiest definition I've got of that is, I'm sick of all this stuff. I'm just going to quit. That's weary. I'm sick of it. I'm done. Not going to do it anymore. And then discouraged. Discouraged means exhausted. You just reach a point when you've done pretty much all you can do and you are exhausted. And he said, don't do that. Don't become sick of it. Don't become exhausted. Keep on going. Why? Because Jesus did. Because he stayed right there and he didn't quit. And we don't need to either. Then he says, you've not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin. Probably for us, that's a little bit difficult to grab hold of. But imagine, they would put metal in what we would call a boxing competition. They put metal in and on their gloves, and they pop the other guy with the metal. Now just imagine somebody's got some brass knuckles, and he's hitting you with it. Well, it wouldn't take many hits for most anybody to start bleeding, would it? So the writer says, you've not yet resisted blood. You're in the fight, all right, but you haven't seen the worst of it yet. It just hasn't happened yet. Some others already had. Guess who did? Stephen. Had Stephen resisted blood? Yeah, they killed him. They stoned him to death. What about James, the apostle of our Lord? Acts chapter 12. He resisted blood. Herod killed him with a sword. So some had resisted the blood, but this writer said, you haven't. And they knew. They would have known these people that I'm talking about. They may have known them firsthand, by name. They may have been friends. I don't know. But he said, you don't give up now. There's no reason to do that. So then he continues. And you've forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you're rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. All right, chastening, that's the first word. Might be better translated for us, child training. When you train children, you have to tell them no sometimes, don't you? You have to give them what they don't want, so to speak. I'd say that when I was a boy, that if Mom had asked me, "What do you want for breakfast?" I said, "Well, chocolate cake. That'd be really good." What about lunch? Well, chocolate cake would be real good. What about supper? Well, chocolate cake. It'd be good. All the time. But guess what? Eventually, I'd gotten sick, wouldn't I? Probably would have been a diabetic, and lots of other potential problems, because of that, malnourished and otherwise. So child training requires saying some no's, restraining people, and then you got rebuked. That's correction. Nobody likes it. I don't know a soul that likes to be corrected, but it's better to be corrected than to keep going wrong and to pay for it. So to speak. And then scourges, that's flogging, maybe roughly the equivalent of our spanking, whipping, maybe, roughly that. Okay, I did not get to the end of the notes you have, but I got far enough along that if Drew can't finish, it's his own fault.